The kind of silence that fills a hospital at 2 a.m. isn't peaceful. It's predatory. Lenora Hatch had worked the overnight shift at Blackwood Medical Center's billing department long enough to know the difference between quiet and held breath. The hallways smelled like antiseptic and old coffee, and the fluorescent lights in the back offices flickered just enough to make you feel like the building was watching. Most of the administrative staff had gone home. The security guard at the front desk was named Phil, and Phil was asleep by 11 every single night without fail. The cleaning crew moved through the East Wing at 1 and were done by 2. After that, Lenora was alone. That was how she liked it. She was not the kind of woman people noticed. She knew that. She had made a kind of peace with it, or something that looked like peace from the outside. At 31, she was soft in the places the world called wrong and sharp in all the places it forgot to look for. She wore cardigans in colors that didn't demand attention. She kept her dark hair pulled back. She sat at the corner desk, not by the window, and she had never once been invited to a departmental happy hour. When she walked through a room, people's eyes moved over her like she was furniture. Background. Part of the architecture. Lenora had learned to use that. She caught things other people missed, not because she was trying to, because when no one looks at you, you get very, very good at looking back. It was on a Tuesday in November. The kind of cold that comes before the snow, all iron sky and the smell of something waiting. When she first noticed the discrepancy, she hadn't been looking for it. She was cross-referencing vendor invoices with the hospital's procurement ledger, the kind of soul-deadening task that required a second cup of coffee and a willingness to surrender your evening to numbers. The invoices for Meridian Biotech, a medical supply company that serviced Blackwood's private care wing, had been processed 3 times in a single billing cycle. Different authorization codes, same line items, same amounts. The kind of error that would take months to surface through normal auditing channels, if it surfaced at all. Lenora almost flagged it as a data entry mistake. Almost. She pulled the secondary authorization file. The override code belonged to no one on the current administrative roster. It had been generated through a backdoor access point that shouldn't have existed in Blackwood's system at all. She sat with that for a long moment, the fluorescent light flickering once above her head. Then she dug deeper. By 1 in the morning, she had found 4 more ghost vendors. By 2, she had traced the payment chain to a holding company registered in Delaware with a name she didn't recognize, Castellum Group, LLC. By 3, she had made herself a 3rd cup of coffee, sat down on the floor of her office because she needed to think without looking at a screen, and come to the conclusion that somewhere between $8 and $12 million had been quietly flowing out of Blackwood Medical Center over the past 2 years, routed through a web of shell companies so elegant that whoever built it had done so with the confidence of someone who had never once feared being caught. She should have called her supervisor. She almost did. She had her phone in her hand. She had Dr. Patricia Owen's number already pulled up, the chief financial officer who had been at Blackwood for 20 years and wore blazers in institutional beige and had shaken Lenora's hand exactly once, on the day Lenora was hired, and had not really looked at her since. She almost pressed call. Then she remembered the secondary authorization code. It had a departmental prefix that routed back to hospital administration. Not IT, not finance, administration. Lenora put her phone face down on her desk. She thought about that for a very long time. She thought about what it meant to discover something this size in a building where the people making the decisions about her future could not pick her face out of a lineup. She thought about what it meant to be the kind of woman who got overlooked, in a situation where being overlooked was the only thing keeping her safe. She thought about what it meant to bring this to the wrong person. Then she thought about the private care wing. The West Wing of Blackwood Medical Center was not like the rest of the hospital. The rooms there had actual windows. The food was catered. The staff-to-patient ratio was obscene by any normal standard. Blackwood's private care wing served a very specific clientele. The kind of clientele that arrived in cars with tinted windows and did not give their real names to the intake nurse. Lenora had processed billing for that wing for 2 years. She had never asked questions. She had filed the paperwork and moved on. Because that was what you did when you were smart enough to understand that some buildings have rooms you don't open. But she knew one name. Everyone in Chicago who paid any attention at all knew the name. The private care wing's most consistent patient. Not a patient himself, but a guarantor. A name on the forms, the signature that appeared on payment authorizations whenever someone from his organization required medical care with complete discretion, was Dorian Ashvale. Lenora sat in her corner office at 3:15 in the morning, with $12 million of embezzlement evidence on her screen, and the full understanding that the man who had been quietly funding Blackwood's private wing for the better part of a decade was, depending on who you asked, either a very successful private equity investor or the most dangerous man in the city. She got up. She made a 4th cup of coffee. She went back to her desk. She thought about what she was. She was a 31-year-old billing analyst who ate lunch alone and had not been promoted in 3 years, despite doing the work of a department twice her size. She was the woman who fixed everyone else's errors without being thanked for it. She was the woman who knew where every dollar in this building had been, was, and would be, and had never once been asked for her opinion in a meeting. She was invisible, and she had just found something that someone in this building was willing to do very bad things to keep hidden. She made her decision the way she made all her decisions, quietly, methodically, and without telling anyone. She copied the files to an encrypted drive. She documented the access logs, the vendor chains, the authorization codes, and the Delaware registration. She wrote up a summary so clean and precise that any forensic accountant in the country could follow it in under an hour. She did not send it to her supervisor. She did not contact the FBI. She did not call a lawyer. She thought about what would happen if she handed this to the wrong person inside this building. Then she thought about what it would mean to hand it to someone who had every reason to want to know the truth and enough power to do something about it. She printed 1 copy of the summary. She folded it in thirds. She addressed it by hand in sharp block letters to the name she had seen on 1,000 payment authorizations. Then she went to work the next day, and she waited. Dorian Ashvale came to Blackwood Medical Center on the first Thursday of every month. Not for himself, for a man named Clement, an old soldier, or something like a soldier, who had served Dorian's organization for 30 years and whose loyalty had earned him the kind of care that didn't ask for insurance cards. Dorian did not announce his visits. He did not take the main entrance. He came in through the parking structure on the south side, used the elevator to the 4th floor, and sat in the private family lounge outside room 412 for exactly 45 minutes. He did this alone. His security detail waited in the cars. This was not because Dorian Ashvale was careless. It was because Dorian Ashvale had not survived 42 years, 18 of them at the top of a structure that did not forgive mistakes, by being predictable. The building knew him. He had paid enough to ensure that, and a man who paid well and quietly was a man who was protected without anyone needing to be told why. He was in the hallway outside 412, jacket on, preparing to leave when the billing analyst approached him. He noticed her the way he noticed everything, immediately, completely, without showing it. He had trained himself to process rooms in seconds. She was not a threat. She was a woman in a green cardigan, medium height, carrying a folder against her chest with both hands. She was looking at him the way people looked at something they had decided to do before their fear could stop them. He had seen that look before. He respected it more than most things. She walked directly to him. She did not slow down. She held out the folded paper and said, without preamble, "You have a problem inside this building. I found it. I'm giving it to you because the alternative is giving it to the people who created it. This is everything. Do with it what you want." Then she stepped back. He looked at the paper. He looked at her. "You work here," he said. "Billing," she said. "I've processed your guarantor paperwork for 2 years. I don't know your name." "I know," she said. "That's why I'm still standing here." He unfolded the paper. He read it in the hallway with the fluorescent lights overhead and the distant sound of a television from room 410 and a cleaning cart rattling somewhere down the corridor. He read it the way he read everything, without expression, without rushing. When he finished, he folded it again along its original creases and held it loosely at his side. The number was not what surprised him. The method was. "How long did this take you?" he asked. "About 4 hours, and you haven't told anyone." "I don't know who's involved," she said. "It goes to administration. I didn't want to hand it to a problem." He studied her, not the way men usually studied her, or rather, the way they didn't. He looked at her the way he looked at something he was trying to understand. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She stood there in her green cardigan with her hands at her sides and met his gaze like she had already decided the outcome of this and was simply waiting for him to catch up. "Your name," he said. "Lenora," she said. "Just Lenora. You can find the rest if you want it, but you don't need it for what I've given you." He smiled almost. "Go back to your office, Lenora," he said. "Don't discuss this with anyone. Not tonight, not tomorrow. I hadn't planned to." She turned and walked back down the hallway. She did not look over her shoulder. He watched her go and thought that in a building full of people who had gone to great lengths to be noticed by him, she was the first person in a very long time who had managed to be interesting. What happened after that was not something Lenora was told about directly, but she was not the kind of woman who needed to be told. She watched, she noticed, she catalogued. 2 days after she handed him the paper, the CFO of Blackwood Medical Center did not come to work. 3 days after that, the Vice President of Administration submitted a sudden resignation, citing personal health reasons. By the end of the week, there were men in suits that did not look like lawyers having very quiet conversations in the boardroom on the executive floor. The CFO's resignation followed a day later, accompanied, Lenora learned, through a combination of internal email threads she wasn't supposed to be able to access and a conversation she overheard in the break room, by a legal settlement of extraordinary scope, the details of which were sealed. Lenora filed her invoices. She cross-referenced her ledgers. She ate lunch at her desk. On the following Monday, there was a visitor badge waiting for her at the front desk. No name on the request, just her name on the badge and a room number, the 4th floor family lounge. She went. Dorian was already there. He was standing by the window, the one that looked out over the parking structure and a slice of grey November sky, with his jacket on and his hands in his pockets. He was taller than she remembered. Or maybe it was just that seeing him in daylight was different. He was the kind of man who occupied space without trying. She had noticed that in the hallway. She noticed it more now. "Sit down," he said. "I'll stand," she said. He turned from the window. Something in his expression shifted. Not surprise exactly. Recognition. "I'm not here to threaten you," he said. "I know. If you were, I wouldn't be standing here. I'd have already sent copies of everything to 3 separate parties." She paused. "I did that before I printed the summary, just so you have the full picture." A beat of silence. "Smart," he said. "I'm a billing analyst," she said. "I live in the numbers. I covered myself the same way I covered the documentation." He pulled out a chair at the small table in the center of the room and sat down. Not like he was conceding, but like he was choosing to. There was a distinction. She understood it. "What do you want?" he asked. She had thought about this. She had thought about it for 7 days. "Nothing," she said. "I didn't do this to get something. I did it. Because someone was stealing from a hospital using your name on the forms, and I thought you had a right to know before whoever built that scheme decided they needed to make the evidence disappear, including the person who found it. He was quiet for a moment. That's it. That's it. Most people, he said, who find themselves in possession of something this sensitive, they want something. Money, protection, leverage. Most people don't find this kind of thing by accident, she said. I wasn't looking for it. I was doing my job. The job I've been doing for 2 years without anyone noticing. She said this without bitterness. She had long since stopped feeling the sting. It was just geography now. I'm good at this. I don't need to be paid for doing it correctly. I needed it out of the building before it became a problem for people who had nothing to do with it. He looked at her for a long time. You're not afraid of me, he said. I'm not stupid, she said. Of course I'm afraid of you. I've spent a week being afraid of you. But I'm more afraid of what happens when someone like you doesn't know what's happening in his own name. He leaned back in his chair. Outside, a car passed in the parking structure and the light through the window changed for a moment and then steadied. I want to offer you something, he said. You don't owe me anything. That's not what I said. He paused. The people who built that arrangement inside this building, they had help. People with financial fluency who knew how to structure payments to survive an audit. I've spent 18 years building something that requires exactly that kind of precision, and I have never once had someone find a hole in 18 months of planning in a single overnight shift. He held her gaze. I want you to consult on a project, limited scope, well compensated, no ongoing obligation. Lenora was quiet. She had not expected this. She had expected, at best, to be told she was safe and sent back to her corner desk. She had not expected to be looked at, actually looked at, the way he was looking at her now, and asked for something. What kind of project? She said. The kind where your specific skill matters, he said. Finding what isn't supposed to be found. By someone who shouldn't have been able to find it. She thought about it for 30 seconds. I want it in writing, she said. Scope compensation and a clear exit clause. Of course, he said, and I keep my job here, obviously. And if I find something else I don't like, I walk. I would expect nothing less. She nodded. She did not shake his hand. He did not offer his. But something settled between them, an understanding, precise and mutual, of the terms of a working arrangement that both of them knew was the beginning of something neither of them had language for yet. It was 6 months before she understood what was happening, or rather, it was 6 months before she let herself understand it. She had told herself, very firmly at the beginning, that this was professional, that the nature of the work, late evenings reviewing financial structures at Dorian's offices in a building on the near north side, sitting across from him at a table covered in documents. The kind of work that required 2 minds in the same room was a business arrangement, that the coffee that appeared on her side of the table, without her asking, prepared correctly, in the way she'd mentioned in passing on exactly one occasion, was a coincidence, that the way he listened to her, completely, without looking at his phone, without jumping to the answer before she finished the sentence, was just how he operated with everyone. She was, as she would later admit only to herself, spectacularly wrong. It was a Tuesday in April, when it became impossible to ignore. She had been cross-referencing a payment chain connected to a construction project. One of several legal ventures Dorian maintained as a counterweight to the rest of his operations. And she had caught a recursive error in the third-party accounting that pointed to a very specific kind of intentional misdirection. She laid it out for him, walking him through the logic step by step, using the whiteboard he'd had installed on the wall at her request. And when she turned around from finishing the diagram, he was watching her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. He looked the way people look when they see something they didn't know they were looking for. She felt it move through her chest like a sound wave. She turned back to the whiteboard because she needed a moment that was not about his face. "The fix is straightforward," she said, keeping her voice even. "Lenora, the recursive entry just needs to be Lenora." She turned. "You've been in this room with me for 6 months," he said. "You've found 3 structural vulnerabilities that my financial team, people who have been doing this for a decade, missed entirely. You've restructured the payment architecture for the construction division and cut the exposure on 4 separate accounts. You did all of that on top of your full-time job." He paused. "I want to ask you something." She waited. "Are you staying because this is a good consulting arrangement?" he said. "Or because of something else?" She could have said it was the consulting arrangement. She almost did. But Lenora Hatch had spent 31 years being very good at pretending to herself, and she was tired of it. "Something else," she said. He nodded, very slowly, like this was information he was settling somewhere permanent inside himself. "Good," he said. "I needed to know that before I said what I'm about to say, which is, I want you here," he said. "Not as a consultant, not as an employee. I want you here because this is the first time in a very long time that I've been in a room and felt like the other person actually saw the whole of what was happening." He held her gaze. "You see everything, Lenora. You always have. I want to be someone you choose to look at." The room was very quiet. She was, for the first time in recent memory, without a prepared response. "You understand what my life is," she said finally. "Yes. You understand what being near you means, what it costs." "I do. I'm not someone you're going to be able to overlook when it's inconvenient." Something shifted in his expression, something that was not quite a smile, but warmer than anything she had seen on him before. "I am aware," he said, "that overlooking you is not an option. You made that clear in a hospital hallway at 3 in the afternoon, and it has not become less clear since." She was quiet for another moment. She thought about her corner desk at Blackwood. She thought about the break room and the happy hours she had never been invited to, and the 3 years without a promotion. She thought about what it had felt like to be 31 and invisible, and very, very good at a thing no one was looking at. She thought about a man who had read a 4-page financial summary in a fluorescent hallway, and looked up and actually asked her name. "Okay," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "Okay," she said again, more firmly. "But I'm keeping my job. Lenora, I'm not a kept woman, Dorian. I'm a billing analyst who moonlights in forensic financial work for a man with complicated professional interests. I keep my job." She paused. "And I want the corner office when the West Wing gets the administrative renovation next quarter. I've been in that back room for 3 years. I've earned a window." He looked at her for a long moment. Then, for the first time, he smiled, fully, without reserve. "Done," he said. It was, she would think later, exactly the right word. Not a promise, not a grand gesture, not a man who spoke in the language of vows and declarations. Just done. The language of someone who, when he said a thing, meant it completely. The world Dorian moved through did not welcome additions. Lenora understood this the way she understood balance sheets. Not by being told, but by observing the mechanics until the logic was clear. There were people in his orbit who smiled at her with the careful precision of people who had learned to manage things they did not want to manage. There were meetings where her presence rearranged the air in a room before she had said a single word. There were men who had spent years positioning themselves as indispensable to Dorian Ashvale, who now had to account for a woman who had arrived from the billing department of a hospital and apparently wasn't leaving. She did not soften herself for any of them. She did not smile wider or speak more gently, or make herself easier to dismiss. She brought the same clarity to every room that she had brought to that 4th-floor hallway. Precise, direct, composed, and Dorian, for his part, made certain things clear without making a speech about them. He introduced her by name, not by title. Not as a consultant, not as an advisor, not with any of the careful qualifiers that might have allowed the room to categorize her as something temporary. He said, "This is Lenora," in the tone of voice he used when he was not asking for anyone's opinion, and the room read it correctly every single time. There was one evening, 6 weeks into what neither of them was yet calling a relationship, though it had taken on the shape of one, when a man named Whitford, who ran the construction division's shell structure, and had been there long enough to believe his tenure was a form of protection, made a comment. It was aimed at Lenora. It was made with a smile and delivered under the cover of humor. It concerned her size and her presence in a room where he believed she should not have had an opinion. Dorian had been across the room. He was not across the room a moment later. He said nothing dramatic. He didn't raise his voice. He spoke to Whitford for approximately 90 seconds in a tone that Lenora could not hear clearly across the space, but that she could read in the way Whitford's entire body changed. The way a man looks when he suddenly understands the precise dimensions of his mistake. Whitford was not in the building the following week. He was not in the building the week after that. No one commented on Lenora's presence in a meeting again. She didn't thank Dorian for it. She had not asked for it. He had not done it as a favor. He had done it because it was factually correct, in his understanding of the world, that the woman who had found a $12 million embezzlement scheme in a single overnight shift, using only publicly available system access and a 4-year-old accounting degree, was not someone a man like Whitford had standing to diminish. That was the thing about him that she had not expected. He did not protect her like she was fragile. He protected her like she was valuable, like what she was, the whole of her, the mind and the body and the stubbornness and the capacity to eat lunch at her desk for 3 years without losing her precision, was worth protecting in the way you protect something real, not because it needed saving, because it mattered. She had never in 31 years been treated like something that mattered in quite that way. She was not entirely sure what to do with it. She was learning. In January, 8 months after a billing analyst in a green cardigan handed a folded piece of paper to the most dangerous man in Chicago, there was a charity gala at the Meridian Hotel on Michigan Avenue. Blackwood Medical Center was one of the beneficiaries. Lenora was invited in her capacity as a senior financial analyst, a title that had appeared on her employment record approximately 30 days after the CFO's quiet departure, accompanied by a raise that no one explained and that she did not question. She wore a dress the color of deep burgundy, fitted at the shoulders and draped at the hem, and she wore her hair down for the first time in years, because it was December, and she had decided, with the quiet deliberateness that characterized every decision she made, that she was done with the architecture of invisibility. She was done with the corner desk and the pulled-back hair and the cardigan colors that blended into walls. She walked into the Meridian Hotel's grand ballroom on a Thursday night in January, and the chandeliers caught the burgundy of her dress, and the room rearranged itself around her the way rooms do when someone enters who has decided to be seen. Dorian was already there. He was across the room in a dark suit that fit him the way expensive things fit men who have always known what fits them, and he was in conversation with 3 people who looked like they mattered, and when she entered he turned. Not because someone told him to, not because she made a sound, but because in 8 months he had become, in some way she could not fully explain, attuned to her presence the way a room is attuned to a change in pressure. He looked at her across the full width of the Meridian's grand ballroom. She looked back, and then, because she was Lenora Hatch, and she did not wait to be approached, she walked toward him. The people he had been talking to fell quiet as she arrived. He said her name in that particular tone, Lenora, the one that had no qualifier attached to it, that required no explanation, that simply indicated that she was here and that her being here was the relevant fact about the room. "You're late," he said. "I'm exactly on time," she said. "You're early. I wanted to be here first. Why?" He held her gaze for a moment. So I could watch you walk in, he said. The three people he had been talking to looked somewhere else. She felt the warmth of it move through her. Not as surprise, because she had stopped being surprised by him, but as something she was still learning to receive without argument. She stood next to him. He placed his hand against the small of her back, light and certain, the way he did everything. Later, much later, after the dinner and the speeches, and the careful choreography of rooms full of people who were watching each other, they stood by the tall windows that looked out over Michigan Avenue and the city below. You found something tonight, he said. It was not a question. She looked at him. The event coordinator's payment structure, she said. The vendor invoices don't match the line items in the gala budget, about $60,000. Small enough that it survives a first pass. Probably been running it across 4 or 5 events per year. She paused. I did the math in my head during the second speech. He was quiet for a moment. You can't turn it off, he said. I've never tried, she said. He looked at her with that expression she had first seen in the family lounge on the 4th floor. The one that was not quite a smile, but held something warmer than admiration. Something that had taken her a long time to name. Lenora, he said. Don't say it like that, she said. Like I've done something remarkable. You did do something remarkable. I did arithmetic. 6 months ago, you found $12 million in a single night and described it as doing your job, he said. Tonight, you found $60,000 during a speech and described it as math. I want you to understand something. He turned to face her fully. You have spent a very long time making yourself small enough that the room couldn't see you. You told yourself it was strategy. It was, but it wasn't only strategy. She was quiet. You're not invisible, Lenora, he said. You never were. The room was just full of people who weren't paying attention. She held his gaze. She thought about the corner desk. She thought about the green cardigan. She thought about 3 years of lunch at her desk, and precisely 0 invitations to happy hour, and a promotion she should have had in 2022 that had gone to a man who had subsequently needed her to fix 4 of his quarterly reports. She thought about a piece of paper folded in thirds and addressed in block letters. I paid attention, Dorian said. From the first moment. I know, she said. I'm going to keep paying attention. I know that too. She turned back to the window. The city below was lit and moving and indifferent, the way cities are, the way they have always been. 1 million people going somewhere, 1 million people not looking. She stood next to the most dangerous man in Chicago, her reflection faint in the tall glass beside his, and she was not invisible. She had not been invisible for a long time. She was just finally ready to believe it.